Welcome, everyone. My name is Hilary Carter, and I'm the Managing Director of the Blockchain Research Institute. And along with our team and partners at MCI, we're very pleased to have you here with us today at Blockchain Revolution Global, keeping the conversation going with another set of thought leaders who are pushing the boundaries of blockchain technology and creating transformational solutions. Blockchain Revolution Global live stream and Global Blockchain Week may have come and gone, but our discussions are far from being over. As part of our commitment to blockchain thought leadership, we're very excited to announce that the content on Blockchain Revolution Global is available to conference registrants until November the 30th. So I'd like to invite everyone to go to register, log into the BRG conference platform on Social 27, and peruse the incredible discussions now available on demand. It's really a mind-boggling repository of blockchain thought leadership on topics such as government and democracy, border crossings, supply chains, manufacturing, regulation, financial services, sustainability. It's all there. Many of you know that at the Blockchain Research Institute, we're investigating blockchain transformations in government, enterprise, and society, and have published more than 100 individual research projects to help inform strategy and decision-making. Several of those projects are very much related to our discussion today. Blockchain and mesh networks, building interoperable blockchains, and blockchain for sustainability solutions. So feel free to visit blockchainresearchinstitute.org for these materials and other important resources too. It's all there. So let's get started. Today we're shining a figurative spotlight on the Cosmos network and two amazing applications that are part of that network. Hence the title of our session, Cosmos and Interactive Applications for a New Global Order. I'd like to welcome our distinguished panelists, Ethan Buchman, Deborah Simpier, and Gregory Landua. Let me take a moment just to share each of their bios. Ethan Buchman is co-founder of the Tendermint and Cosmos projects, where he continues to be actively involved in their development. He received a Bachelor of Science in Physical Science and a Master of Applied Science in Engineering Systems and Computing, both from the University of Guelph. He is CEO of Informal Systems, a company focused on verified distributed systems and organizations, including formal verification of Cosmos protocols and their implementation in Rust. He serves as Vice President of the Interchain Foundation, a nonprofit with a mission to research, develop, and promote open, decentralized networks like the Cosmos Network. Deborah Simpier is a small business veteran who has been active in the Pacific Northwest mesh networking and net neutrality scene for several years. Before she became co-founder and CEO of Althea, she was Althea's first user. Althea is a decentralized internet service provider platform. Instead of one telco company owning all the infrastructure of a network, Althea enables many different stakeholders to participate in a bandwidth marketplace. Althea networks are locally governed and managed. By using private property, they can be built faster and more affordably than legacy networks. Gregory Landua is the co-founder and co-chief regeneration officer of Regen Network, a land ecological commons management platform and the backbone for a new approach to ecosystem service markets based on verified ecological states. He's co-author of the pioneering book, Regenerative Enterprise, the Levels of Regenerative Agriculture White Paper, and the Regen Network White Paper. Before launching the Regen Network, Gregory was CEO of Terra Genesis International, a dynamic global team of permaculture and regenerative agriculture and business practitioners working to help companies transform their negative impacts into positive impacts while leading cutting-edge agroforestry business planning around the world. So there's no shortage of talent or vision here today. So please don't be shy in asking questions to today's guests and do so in the chat box, and we'll get to those questions a little bit later in the discussion. So let me start with Ethan, who has been a great collaborator at the Blockchain Research Institute. Ethan, my friend, welcome back, and tell us why you started Cosmos and what problem it solves.
Hey, Hilary, thanks for having us. We started Cosmos, we came up with the idea for Cosmos back in 2016. Essentially, when we started to realize that, not only were blockchains going to be a thing, and we were going to have Bitcoin and Ethereum and a few others, but that there were going to be many, many blockchains in the world, and there were many use cases for them, and communities all over the world would have their own needs, their own value systems, their own requirements, and they would want to manifest those in blockchain applications and in individual distinct blockchains. And we thought of it a lot like the world of computers a few decades ago, when there were, hundreds of different computer companies starting up, creating different kinds of computers, different hardware, different software to run in different environments. And each of those computers was sort of, independent and on its own, and none of them really spoke to each other. And there was a lot of fragmentation. And sort of we saw the same thing happening with the blockchain space, and we wanted to resolve that. And so that meant we effectively wanted to build an internet of blockchains. We wanted to build technology that would enable this proliferation of blockchains to happen in such a way that they would still be interoperable. There wouldn't be this kind of fragmentation. They'd still be able to work together. But not only did we want to enable this sort of interconnectivity between these different blockchains, we also wanted to build the tools that would enable communities to build the blockchains that suited their needs and their values, and to still have control over them. And so those two sort of values of interoperability and sovereignty were really at the heart of the vision for Cosmos, and are what we have been pursuing for the last almost 5 years now.
Awesome. So your vision is fulfilled. You've built out Cosmos, and how is it going?
It's not quite fulfilled. It's still in progress, but it's going well. There's still this sort of final piece of the actual interoperability protocol going live, which will hopefully happen in the next few months. There are already many blockchains built using the Cosmos technology that are actually live. There's a few $1 billion worth of market cap associated with those blockchains. And then there's many more that haven't quite gone live yet, and will soon over the next few months or the next years. And once the interoperability protocol is ready, which should be, again, it's in sort of the final stages of testing, those many different blockchains will be able to connect to each other. So we're very excited about all the adoption we've been seeing, and about what's coming next when all these blockchains start talking to each other.
Wow. So we'll keep an eye out for announcements and, the constant evolution of the protocol. That's great news. About 3 years ago, you joined us at the Research Institute for a webinar whereby, the ecosystem was not quite as mature as it is today. And you had some comments on standards that, in 2017, it was probably too early to have a conversation around standards. Do you still feel that way? Do you think that we've evolved enough as an ecosystem to have the standardization conversation?
Sure. I think a few years ago, there's still a lot of things hadn't quite happened yet. There were still a very small number of base blockchain types, let's say. Proof of stake, no proof of stake, real modern proof of stake blockchain had launched yet. Whereas today, now there are many of them, and there's many more coming. We've seen in the last year or two, we've seen Tezos, we've seen Cosmos, Polkadot, Near, Solana. ETH2 is around the corner. So many proof of stake blockchains coming online, and so there's now more of a need to think about, okay, if we want to interoperate between these many different blockchains, what kind of standards do we need to put in place so that we don't have a bespoke interoperability solution for each one, because then it's not interoperability at all, right? So certainly there's a much more opportunity for standardization now, and we've spent the better part of the last year or two actually working on some standardizations of what we call the inter-blockchain communication protocol, which is nearing completion or maturity, and which should launch in the next couple months, that will enable different blockchains to communicate. Yeah.
Awesome. So is it fair to say standardization is probably a different kind of standardization is at the heart of the work that you're doing?
Yeah.
Awesome. In your opinion, why do you think innovators come to Cosmos to build out their solutions?
I think it's those two values I put forward. So interoperability and sovereignty, that resonates with a lot of people. I mean, everyone wants to be interoperable. No one wants to be in their own silo, but people also want to be in control of their destiny. Maybe in the more traditional enterprise world, this value of sovereignty would have been known as not having vendor lock-in, right? So people are always concerned about, oh, if I go with a particular vendor, am I then going to be stuck with them until the end of time, and it'll be expensive to switch, and all this sort of thing. The Cosmos technology was built from the ground up to prioritize flexibility for the developers and for the users to enable them to make the choices that are right for them and to enable them to move and to change sort of the pieces so that they wouldn't get locked in. And then not only do we provide those values, we're also, arguably one of the most mature platforms for building public proof of stake based blockchains and cryptocurrency systems. And so by proving out the technology in the wild, I think more people are coming to the platform and saying, okay, this is something I could trust to build a business upon.
Great. And obviously you've had success because we've got two incredibly inspiring leaders here to tell their transformational project stories, who are part of the Cosmos ecosystem and obviously share in those values of interoperability and sovereignty. And so let me begin with Deborah. Deborah, you joined the Althea project as its first user. Tell us about your onboarding experience and then your professional transformation.
Yeah, I think this is, how many innovative businesses are built, right? They always say that necessity is the mother of invention. So I have been a small business owner for over 15 years now, most of that in a rural area, and have seen firsthand a few of the different solutions that didn't work, including, grants for $1 million to build, infrastructure, fail in providing a sustainable or long-term solution. Because when we actually look at the problems with the digital divide, and 40% of the users in the US don't access the internet broadband speed. So the problem is quite large and widespread. Throwing grant money at the problem without a sustainable economics wasn't working, right? We still had people that didn't have infrastructure built to their home or couldn't access the infrastructure because the cost was too high. Actually just read a study in Portland, Oregon, 13% of low-income households have no internet access at all, despite having multiple choices of infrastructure to their home. So when we were, kind of looking at the needs of our community, we realized that this needed a change in an economic platform instead of just more of a build of infrastructure. And so that's where kind of Althea came from. And yes, my community here in Oregon was our kind of first test bed and our first users. And it was really quite inspiring, especially when COVID hit. We were able to, change prices, in response to the network's needs. We were able to add capacity seamlessly in response to network's needs, and also grow to add in and new users through the the kind of private property model that we use.
So tell me a little bit more about the extent to which there's the digital divide and how that was so exacerbated by the onset of COVID-19. What did people have to do to just try to connect?
Yeah, what was really interesting is that a lot of people, especially in rural areas and, I think urban as well, had ameliorated the digital divide by driving to work, right? So maybe you didn't have internet at home, but you could drive to your workplace. For example, we have, there was a prenatal nurse that lives in the kind of rural area around us here, coincidentally a mile from fiber, right? So the infrastructure is there, but wasn't out to her. And she had been making it work by driving to her work, which was over 2 hours away. So 2 hours there, 2 hours back. But when COVID hit, that was no longer an option for her. And they required, though, if she was going to work at home, she had to have high-speed internet. So what was really great with our model, we were able to, incentivize a marina actually to build that extra infrastructure, build out some vertical assets, and host hardware to provide her internet access. And now she's getting, 70 megabits per second down, low latency, even, a few kind of hops from the main fiber, and, able to, work from home.
And is it as affordable or even more so than using a traditional carrier?
Yeah, that's what's really exciting about it, is that this model basically aligns the incentives with the user. So we treat bandwidth as a commodity, and users get a choice on their router whether they prefer to receive lower cost bandwidth or higher quality. So this keeps the kind of checks and balances of the marketplace in place. And for most of our users, it's around $40 a month, which is about half, 2/3 of the price of a normal comparable connection.
And that's incredibly reasonable. Is the payment mechanism restricted to cryptocurrency, or could you use Visa card? How does that work?
So typically right now we have we integrate with the Wire payment app, which is just a little easy to use widget. On their router dashboard, they click add funds, you put in your debit card, and behind the scenes, they buy Ethereum, which is then bridged to a stable XDAI currency. So it looks very much like buying dollars credit. So folks put on 50 or 100, and oftentimes people put on $200 or $400 onto their router to pay for their internet.
Wow, so it's really user friendly.
Yep.
Okay, so I'd love to set this up at my cottage, which is 3 hours north of Toronto. I don't know if operating in my area is possible, but how do you explain how a new customer gets set up on the Althea network? Everything from physical infrastructure that's needed to the digital side.
So Althea is a software platform. So we typically interact in a B2B2C, right? So business to business to in subscriber. So we work with small businesses, cooperatives, municipalities, tribal folks to set up these kinds of networks using our software platform. This allows them to sort of, leverage existing resources, whether that's, your house because you're outside the city, maybe you're in a good location, you can see some neighbors, or that's a business to start the network at, or an existing tower or a carrier. And then this local organization running our software will help you get the right equipment. They'll oftentimes, send an installer out to install that for you. So it's very seamless, very much like, you would have with a traditional legacy provider, where the maintenance and the hardware and the technical aspects of that are provided from your local customer service folks, and then the hardware can be owned by very different people.
So anyone, anywhere? Is this limited to a certain geography right now?
So no, actually, in fact, we have networks in Nigeria and soon to be Ghana and a few other places in Africa and South America. And so yeah, we're essentially, like I said, we're a platform. The key innovations are on routing and billing, and it can be, and that is the benefit of, or some of the benefit of using blockchain is that it's available anywhere.
Yeah, amazing. And I have one more question for Deborah before I move on to Gregory. In Canada, which is where I'm based and Ethan's based, Starlink's low Earth orbit satellites have recently received regulatory approval to service remote communities in Canada. How does Althea fit into that sort of Starlink world and that conversation?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. And so Althea, being the platform, can take advantage of the latest technology. In fact, we are working with LTE and fiber, and as well as fixed wireless. So essentially how Starlink works is it's very much like the other satellite providers or other kind of providers of any kind of internet, is you have a fiber line that goes to a gateway, and the gateway beams up to the satellites, and they're lower Earth, so they perform better. Radios perform better when they're closer. And then from the satellite, then beams down to the user's terminals. So then back at that fiber, all of the internet is a series of tubes, right? It's a series of interconnects. So from the fiber, there's middle mile that gets built to your, what they call the IX, or the interconnect of the network, where different carriers interconnect. So what's really interesting is because you do have already somewhat of a multi-stakeholder model. Somebody's running the fiber, owns the fiber. That's different than Starlink, who owns the medium of transmission to the satellites, who then interconnects back at the data center. And what's really kind of interesting is when we start talking about that point of intersection at the data center, this model that Althea uses is already present there. All of the different carriers have a bandwidth marketplace. There's peering agreements and a bandwidth that's bought and sold. And what's interesting is when you have this seamless interoperable bandwidth marketplace, the cost of bandwidth has been going down for the last decade or so. So what Althea is doing is saying, let's coordinate that back to Starlink, right? Let's coordinate all of these different multi-stakeholders in a seamless, interoperable way and get the benefits of that marketplace, not just at the core of the network, but all the way down to the end user.
So that's really interesting. It sounds to me like there are reasons to be optimistic from both a pricing and an access point of view.
Absolutely. I think that, the more open and competitive a marketplace is, that, historically that makes it better for the end consumer.
Yeah. All right. Okay. That's great. Deborah, thanks for that introduction. So Gregory, he's been very patiently standing by.
It's been great to hear about Althea. I'm a big fan.
Oh yeah. No, these are just hugely inspiring projects. So this is part of the whole purpose-driven ecosystems vertical and sustainability and resources vertical of our conference program. That the world needs this conversation. We need to know about these applications right now. There's a lot of other stuff going on in the world, but it's really nice to hear how things are changing in a positive direction. So you're reversing climate change at Regen Network. Bravo. Tell us about how that works.
Yeah, well, so I guess I'll try to take this in layers. So at the top layer is the realization that land, especially working lands, have the potential to, if they're healthy and resilient and biodiverse, they have the potential to sequester massive amounts of carbon into soil and forests and even ocean systems. And so if we have thriving ecosystems, we have climate stability. However, of course, as we all know, there's a perverse incentive. There are misaligned incentives in the short term versus the long term. So of course, we all want a healthy Earth, but many of us are in economic situations in which we're forced to try to generate short-term profit at the expense of long-term ecological health. And so Regen Network's mission here is to realign short-term profit incentives with long-term ecological health, so that our working lands and forests can serve as a solid foundation for biosphere health, which provides benefits like reversing climate change, stabilizing the climate, providing clean water, clean air, good food, fuel, fiber. All of the things that human civilization depend on healthy ecosystems. And we've been degrading and sort of mining those ecosystems for actually many thousands of years, but especially the last couple hundred. And so our aim here is to reverse that trend and to realign the economic incentives in order to do so.
Wow, amazing. In which markets do you operate? And how did you get started in connecting the dots that blockchain was a mechanism that allowed for the better alignment of incentives?
Yeah, well, so first I'll just say our go-to-market strategy is based around essentially a three-sided marketplace, which is connecting sort of CSR, corporate social responsibility, and ESG buyers who are working to offset their carbon and who are participating in science-based goals as corporations to be able to buy and offset their carbon. And then the other side of the market is, of course, the land stewards who are providing these verified carbon outcomes. And then the third side of the marketplace is actually monitors and verifiers. So people who actually provide the scientific rigor in order to sort of issue and verify claims about land use. So our go-to-market strategy is sort of a carbon marketplace. There's a whole sort of really interesting set of topics there around how we're innovating to transform some really big issues around transparency and double counting to create a really highly functional marketplace there. And I'll sort of take a pause and maybe introduce for listeners this sort of, your question, why blockchain? What does blockchain have to do with this? Well, so there's sort of this fundamental need. I oftentimes say, hey, what we're talking about is a public good here that's previously not been accounted for. So, a healthy atmosphere and healthy ecosystems are what are oftentimes referred to as public goods, which is that little quadrant in standard economic theory, which everybody's like, we don't need to value that. So we do need to figure out a way to incorporate those public goods into our business models and our policy. I commonly say you can't solve public goods problems with private goods solutions. So simply trying to approach that with a private platform where there isn't transparency and there is not a peer-to-peer ownership of the verification infrastructure needed to track these assets, it simply doesn't work, because you have sort of these different siloed private marketplaces and the data doesn't talk to each other, and there's double issuance, and there's all of these challenges, right? And so enter the blockchain, which is sort of, there's this emergent public good, which is the ability to know who said what, when, and where, in our case, using a distributed ledger system. So that distributed ledger holds all of the key metadata, in metadata in this case is things like identity and where on Earth we're talking about, what other climate markets this asset may be available on, etc. And then the actual data we're talking about is the carbon sequestration data, right? So we can issue these assets in a way that's fully transparent and done on a public blockchain. So we're big proponents of the public blockchain approach for climate issues, which we can get into a little bit more maybe down the line.
Yeah, fascinating. I did some research for the Blockchain Research Institute on a project that was a blockchain-based project that was, its mission was to preserve life below water, save 30% of the oceans by 2030, in line with SDG 14, and essentially save fish stocks in marine protected areas. So it's very important to link value to ecological regeneration. But where blockchain played a vital role was being the transparent platform that could secure the data around that natural capital asset. So this organization used water-based drones and environmental DNA, which took water samples, and was able to kind of map and count and catalog the different fish species in a given area, and then present that, assign an economic value to that, and present it to a government to say, look, this is the actual economic value to this ecological region. And so this is the cost if it should disappear, is the cost of the economy. This is the lost asset. How have you been successful in linking value to ecological regeneration at Regen Network?
Yeah, well, first, I just want to sort of take a step back and note that the biggest transformation in sort of recent history in our sort of the way that business approaches environmental health was the creation of the EPA, which was under Richard Nixon. And if we all remember how that happened, was that a scientist figured out how lead was reducing children's IQ and was able to place an economic cost to the economy of people being dumb, right? So just exactly what you said. There are economic costs that can be quantified, and maybe some part of us, we may rightfully react to the financialization and monetization of everything. However, it is true that there are economic costs, and it's a good place to start this conversation. So it is really important. And the answer to your question, have we been succeeding in sort of that first step in our go-to-market strategies, which is there a market in which people are aware that they have an economic upside to participate in incentivizing carbon sequestration into living systems? And the answer is yes. There is a huge groundswell of projects, marketplaces, approaches around what I would call sort of living carbon, which is the quantification, verification, quantification, and commoditization of carbon that is held in ecosystems. right? And so there's a very the voluntary carbon marketplace has been booming. Last year and this year were the biggest year on record, and it just sort of keeps going up. The UN and World Bank are estimating that this is going to be a larger industry than currently the oil industry is. The entire energy sector, essentially this is going to start being somewhere around a $1.5 trillion a year sector, which is to say that the sort of natural capital commodities, where you're actually able to quantify and value the ecosystem services that are provided to all of the different stakeholders, will be around a $1.5 trillion a year industry. Currently, it's between, depending on how you count it, the carbon markets are, I think, if I'm not mistaken, voluntary carbon markets were only about $150 million last year. Total ecosystem service markets were 36 billion. So that includes water and biodiversity and other things that people currently are counting. So there's we're just now at the giant inflection growth point. So some of the really interesting things that are happening in our world are we're working with a group called Open Team, which is funded by the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, which is in turn funded by the USDA. It's essentially sort of the research and development. It's like DARPA for agriculture, I guess you might say. And we're working with a group that includes General Mills and a consortium called the Ecosystem Service Marketplace Consortium, which includes in turn McDonald's and Unilever and other folks and tier one research institutions. We're essentially working with this big community to create the sort of pre-competitive public data and settlement infrastructure, so that things aren't double counted, so that the appropriate data and verification pipelines are there. So our role at Regen Network is sort of building this peer-to-peer blockchain-based infrastructure for markets and claims, as well as verification data pipelines. We do a lot of work on the science side as well. So we're building automated systems to pull a variety of different remote sensing data in to be able to anchor claims. We work with farmer applications where farmers are using their software to sort of do day-to-day management. And so they have a big pool of their own data. So to be able to bring that data in a way that sort of preserves the sovereignty and ownership of the farmer over that data and isn't doing sort of a surveillance capitalist sort of, steal and mine that data, but instead can where farmers can choose to either monetize it or use it in sort of blind verification systems. So, to sort of wrap up my share there's a lot of interest and there's a huge amount of market validation for what's happening here. The challenges, of course, I believe, lead us towards an understanding and lead traditionally very conservative, in quotes, conservative members of the ecosystem, whether it's governmental agencies or corporates or farmers, who are traditionally one of the most conservative groups of people in society, to understand that there needs to be this sort of pre-competitive public infrastructural approach, which the Cosmos SDK and a proof of stake based approach is definitely the best available at the moment.
I'm going to come back to what you said about working with traditional organizations and farmers in a minute. I wanted to ask Ethan to just reflect on Regen Network, Althea Networks, and how you feel about the fact that these two transformational projects are working with Cosmos, and just to say, you must feel a tremendous sense of pride, but I'll let you articulate what it's like to see these kinds of developments unfolding.
For sure. It fills me with tremendous joy to see this happening. And it's sort of exactly what we were building for. And what I love about these two projects in particular is that they sort of span the gamut from the hyper local to the hyper global, right? So with Althea, you're talking about like rural communities who are hardly even connected to the internet, and like helping small groups of people anywhere in the world, but a small group of people somewhere in particular, to come online and to sort of take ownership and responsibility for their own local internet infrastructure. And then on the other end, you're talking about like the biggest challenge facing the entire globe of climate change, and how do we address that? And at the heart, you're using the exact same technology. You're using, the Cosmos network stack, the proof of stake underlying. So seeing that same piece of general purpose technology being used to cross the whole spectrum from the hyperlocal to the hyperglobal for two very real, very critical challenges in the 20th century is just amazing validation of what we've built.
Yeah, it's refreshing because so often this technology is associated, wrongly so, in most cases, with nefarious activities. And so to shine a spotlight on the so-called blockchain for good applications is really refreshing. And so for both, I guess I'll ask Deborah first and then go to Gregory to comment. The idea of building trust and value streams with a community that might be uncomfortable with technology or changes to the way that they have embraced their business practices. How do you address those challenges and onboard communities to your individual solutions?
Yeah, I think there's kind of a lot of talk that we've already previously addressed about essentially coordinating a disparate group of stakeholders, right? And I think that's ultimately what the software does. And I think we actually haven't had too much trouble with sort of getting the buy-in to a multi-stakeholder model, because especially in rural areas, because there's been a lot of previous instances of this that have been done, like electrical co-ops. So this is infrastructure that is cooperatively owned. This was FDR's rural electrification process that that was extremely successful in taking economically challenged areas and bringing electricity to them, and we also sort of see what's really interesting is there's also these legal structures in the U.S. called like special districts or small districts where you have cooperatively owned wells, water, drainage, dikes, all these kinds of things that are, sort of structured as a cooperatively owned, and then also working alongside private property. We also have some examples where you had solar, as you're producing energy from solar cells, then you got credit for it automatically, right? So this also resonates a lot with rural people who basically understand these concepts. So sort of the kind of buy-in to a multi-stakeholder platform is already there. But coming in and being able to automate and coordinate that process is, where we can really scale. And I think that's what's really exciting. And it also resonates also in urban areas as well, where, you have a need for some public, right-of-way cooperative ownership, right? Where you have, trunk lines or co-owned infrastructure, and then, privately owned fiber to the, apartment or the building. And kind of coordinating all of that. So that's kind of what I think that's what's exciting about all of these different projects that we're talking about here, is that we can take this these disparate groups of stakeholders and really make a seamless process for coordination.
That makes a lot of sense. It sounds like there are a lot of community-based organizations and frameworks in place that now can be connected and coordinated on a multi-purpose platform, which is exciting. Gregory, how about your experience in getting people to work with?
Yeah, well, I mean, last summer we did a little test to just put it out to our networks to get farmers, to get land stewards to sign up and see how that went, and see if people act. There was demand from the land steward side to be providing these ecosystem services like carbon credits into a marketplace. And we made a goal of 100,000 acres, and we gave ourselves a week to try to meet that goal. And we got 5.5 million acres signed up in that week.
Wow.
So just as like a little test. And then on the other side of the market, I mean, we're in conversations right now. I basically think there's competition for different groups to essentially buy all of the credits that we can issue, because because right now there's all of these corporates who are making very ambitious net zero carbon pledges. You have Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Stripe, all of these big tech folks. You have Delta Airlines, even the oil companies, right, are pledging net neutrality. Many of the corporates understand that the risks associated with carbon emissions mean that they need to put it onto their ledger and they need to balance their carbon budget. And so they need to go out and buy these credits in order to balance their carbon budget. That's a non-controversial statement in the year 2020. So the demand way outpaces the supply. I mean, there's so much more demand for these sort of high quality verified carbon units. And the nice thing in our case about being in this sort of working land space, agriculture, forestry, ocean systems, is that there's a whole suite of co-benefits that come from sequestering carbon into these ecosystems, which include clean water, healthy air, biodiversity, reduced flood. So it's really a kind of a no-brainer investment on the buyer side too. So, we're seeing a lot of demand. It's quite an exciting time.
Yeah, that's terrific news, and I'm not surprised as organizations are coming to align themselves with the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures and to demonstrate their climate risk resilience and to measure their emissions and so on. That they need a solution to help make their climate commitments seamless. So, does everybody know about you? How can we help?
Well, yeah, I mean, we would love to. We're happy to have conversations about either buying our existing stock of carbon credits. Also, I mean, we're taking an sort of an open platform approach in which we really want to be able to bring stakeholders together to generate the credit class that makes sense for them and the verification system that makes sense for them. And so we have a set of existing carbon credits that we're sort of showing, hey, this is how it works. Here's how you develop the methodology. Here's how you run the verification. Here's how this all works with this sort of full stack approach with the blockchain state machine at the base. But what we really are hopeful is that because, again, this is a multi-stakeholder problem, and really each place and each constellation ideally needs to sort of approach this and start working through and create their own sort of their own approach to credit classes, and then work on making sure that those all sort of are interoperable. Are we quantifying the same thing? Do we have a map of the right sort of verification system? So, yeah, there's 2 layers. I would invite people to interact. One is, hey, I mean, 3 really. If you're a land steward and you'd like to be on a marketplace to sell ecosystem services, and you feel like you can sort of transform your working lands into something that's a carbon sink, sign up on our platform. If you'd like to, if you're a company and you're looking for offsets right now, let us know. And you can also sign up on our platform to be sort of one of the early groups who gets access. And if you're interested in if you're an entrepreneur or project developer and you're interested in creating new credit classes that can be listed on the registry, get in touch with us because we have tools for you.
Sounds great. Deborah, how about you guys? Do you have the same kind of demand opportunities, or how can people get involved in Althea and help steward your initiatives forward?
Yeah, it strikes me that there's actually quite a bit of synergy between Gregory's work and my own. We also work with a working group that includes the USDA and nonprofits and smaller, municipal governments, county governments, and so we actually have a process for a response to a community that maybe needs to have internet, maybe isn't even incorporated, right? You just have a small grouping of folks. Like how do you go about starting and planning and building a network? So we definitely have an influx. We've had like over 900 people sign up that they would like to start an Althea network in their area. So kind of working through that and With networks, there's no one size fits all, right? So we definitely work with folks that are starting the network to utilize the best technology together with the Althea software to build a most sustainable system in their area. Yeah, but very exciting. I'm also very excited about our work with the tribal folks who historically have been underrepresented and had a greater instances of people not having access to broadband. And one of the things the FCC did was actually let them have opened some of the 2.5 gigahertz spectrum for tribal networks. So really exciting to see how they can unlock that technology within Althea software to build sovereign tribal networks. It's really exciting.
That's awesome.
That's great news. Ethan, as a protocol developer and leader of the whole blockchain ecosystem, how your onboarding activities would be rather different from, say, Gregory's or Deborah's. How do you go about conveying the opportunities for Cosmos, for blockchain within your core constituents?
Yeah, so a lot of people have come into the blockchain space looking at how to build applications, and they end up, inevitably at something like Ethereum, which is a very open and welcoming and decentralized community, but a lot of the tools are new and quite bespoke, and less familiar to someone who's been in, say, software development and is looking for a mature software development stack for this blockchain space. And then on the alternative is like, okay, well, I can go to IBM and Hyperledger, and they have, say, mature software, but then it comes with the sort of vendor lock-in and the monolith that is associated with using the technology of a large company. And so we're somewhere in between there, where if you want that sort of open, decentralized community aspect, but you also want the sort of freedom and to not have the lock-in and to have the sort of flexibility, but you want a mature software stack and to be able to be using traditional programming languages, that's where Cosmos sort of fits in. And so it's really, the base Cosmos layer is for people that are looking to build their own blockchain systems for whatever use case, for whatever community. And it's very accessible and productive because it's using, traditional software development tools. You don't have to learn a new programming language. You can write in Golang. You can also write in other languages, Java and C++ and whatever. Most people write in Go because it sort of has the most mature tools for building Cosmos technology, but it's developing in other ecosystems as well. So yeah, it really sits in that sort of in between sort of the traditional enterprise and the sort of fully the open, immature, let's say, kind of blockchain space. Not to say Ethereum is immature, but there's a lot wanting in the sort of developer environment of the Ethereum technology stack. So yeah.
So if you were a computer science student today and you wanted to get involved in the Cosmos open source initiative, do you encourage people to go to GitHub? Do you go to Discord? Where's your core activity taking place?
Yeah, so the Cosmos SDK is the entry point. So that's the software development kit for building Cosmos applications. So if you go to cosmos.network, you can sort of find everything from there. Of course, all the software is on GitHub, github.com/cosmos, /Cosmos SDK is where the SDK lives. And there are very active communities on Discord. We have a discourse forum. There's Telegram channels. All that's you can find at the bottom of the cosmos.network website.
Great, awesome. So many opportunities to get involved. We're closing in on our time. I'll make a final pitch to our listeners for any questions, and I'll turn to a slightly different tack as we move to wrapping our conversation, to ask each of you, outside of your core projects, what are the use cases that use blockchain that most inspire you and that you find are really exciting? Anyone want to take a stab at that first?
You mean besides Regen and Althea?
That's right. Apart from what we discussed today, anything? That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think decentralized finance is really exciting. It's been sort of in an experimental stage, but I think we can see a vision where we are bringing some of these collateralized lending tools, interest-bearing accounts to the home. One of the big learnings that I've had in the field is that actually a great many of our community members are underbanked or unbanked altogether. I have a lot of folks that are, going to the gas station to get prepaid debit cards or cash their checks or do Western Union. And I think this is a really great fit for blockchain applications. And that's, I think, where if we look out to the vision of Althea, some of what we can do as well. I had mentioned earlier that folks deposit 100, 200, sometimes more than that dollars into their router wallets. That could be leveraged for interest bearing, for different types of financial tools, for collateralized lending, all of these things that folks that do not have access to right now. So I'm really excited to see that space grow and mature and eventually sort of move from the experimental stage that it is now to, DeFi for your home.
Yeah. I mean, I would echo that. I'd sort of put an extra layer on, which is that what's most exciting to me is the ability for user-governed decentralized finance. So that is to say, we have the building blocks now to open up and create complementary currencies, to create, lending regimes and systems, and we have the ability to have the users of those systems sort of like a credit union governing the system itself, and that's really going to be transformative, because the financialization of everything maybe is a little bit scary depending on who's governing the financial system. And so imagine a Fed that is transparently governed and in which quantitative easing is directed not to sort of like crony capitalist banks to make sure that they don't fail, but sort of like the pillars of the institutions that make a healthy society, for instance. And the ability to sort of direct inflation and to govern these sorts of things is, and also to create more complex financial instruments that are governed by a subset of users. In our case, we're very excited about the potential to sort of collateralize stable currencies and collateralize loans based on how healthy your ecosystem is, for instance. So you have a new foundation for wealth generation and healthy financial systems that can be tethered and tied to social and ecological goods, basically. So it's very exciting. And there's teams around the world doing some fantastic work with community currencies. And, I just shout out one of my favorite sort of Cosmos adjacent, but more in the Ethereum world project that I always get excited about is Common Stack. And there's a lot of really interesting work going on in that world around complementary currencies and governance of these sorts of systems.
Wow, agreed. The opportunities for both of your, we have a question from Lionel Sarane. Hi all, is blockchain the future of supply chain for the fast use of currency, in brackets Ethereum 2.0? Thanks, Lionel. Anybody want to take a stab at that? Ethan, you have some thoughts?
Sure. I'm not sure exactly the intent of the question, but at some level, I think blockchains are the future of every application in the same way that cloud was the future of every application. So just like almost the entire world's digital infrastructure has moved into the cloud, over the next 20 years, I think we can expect something similar in the blockchain space, which is really just to say that, more transparency, more security, more accountability is likely to come to cloud systems. And the structures they're going to use to do that are going to look a lot like blockchains. We could fight about semantics all day, but that's not really important. But certainly for supply chain and for the reconciliation overhead and, transparency in the provenance of goods and so on, blockchains can play a huge role.
Yeah, and I think what we're seeing in today's conversation is that blockchain is being used for supply chains, whether that commodity is Wi-Fi or whether that commodity is carbon credit and regeneration.
Or anything in between.
And everything in between. I think it's the killer app, absolutely. So I just think this has been a terrific and enlightening conversation. It's a real privilege for me to share in the company of amazing pioneers in the industry who are really reshaping the world and creating a more democratic, a more fair, and a more sustainable planet. So I applaud your efforts, and I do want to thank you so much for your time. And I invite everybody to check out Cosmos, Informal Systems, Regen Network, Althea Networks. Take some time to get to know these solutions and how you and your organizations can become involved, whether supporting financially or in any other way. Keep up the amazing pioneer efforts, everybody. And as a final note, to those of you watching who missed BRG Live, you can still register for the conference. Today's webinar is one of 3 that we have planned over the next few weeks. So keep an eye out for dates for upcoming hot new discussion topics led by an incredible lineup of speakers. Ethan, Deborah, Gregory, any final words?
Thanks, Hilary. This has been fantastic. And thanks to Deborah and Ethan as well. It's been a fun conversation.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care, all. Bye.
Bye. Be
Bye-bye.
well.